Hello. Welcome to the Best of the Best Games Ever panel about the Spiel des Jahres, the German Game of the Year award that started in 1979. Thank you so much for coming. I apologize if I'm a bit hoarse and out of breath. I've literally just finished running a 3-hour panel, and this is an hour and a half, so that's going to be fun. This is not about me. This is about not least my august panel to my left. If I can ask you to introduce yourselves and mention your connection, if any, to the Spiel des Jahres, starting with Ellie.
Hi, I'm Ellie Dix. I've got a new book out called The Board Game Family, and I'm publishing my own games with The Dark Imp, which is a new publisher. And I have no particular connection to the Spiel des Jahres other than my interest is family games.
Yes, the Spiel des Jahres fundamentally it is an award for family games, or was started as an award for family games. So Ellie is something of an expert on those. David.
I'm David Parlett. I'm mainly interested in the history of games, and I've written the history of board games and a history of card games. And I also invent games, at least I used to. I seem to have retired now. But I know the Spiel des Jahres right from its inception because my game won the first one.
Yes, for those who don't know, David designed Hare and Tortoise, the very first game to win the Spiel des Jahres. We quite literally have gaming royalty among us.
My name is Theo Clarke. I started and ran SFC Press. We published Games magazine. We ran games events. I've owned and managed a games distributor and a chain of game shops. And now I am publishing games again with District 31, and I own the rights to Railway Rivals. I feel I should declare an interest here that I own one of the Spiel des Jahres games.
He doesn't mean he owns a copy, he owns the rights to it.
And lots of copies.
And lots of, yes.
I need a copy. I'm Nick Smith. With my wife, I run and own the Ludicrous Board Game Cafe in Croydon, who are supplying the games library this weekend here.
Fantastic. So Nick's very conversant with games, particularly modern games. Theo was writing about games through much of the 80s and the 90s. David won the Spiel des Jahres. Ellie knows family games. I'm James Wallis. I write for Tabletop Gaming. I design games as well. I've been writing the All the Jar column in Tabletop Gaming for the last 3 years now, working through the Spiel des Jahres winners one by one. I thought it'd be fun to do a panel in which we try and work out what the best game of the Spiel des Jahres winners is. But before we do that, David, you weren't at the inception of the Spiel des Jahres, but tell us where it came from.
It was started in the first idea was started in 1978 by a group of German journalists, professional journalists who were also games enthusiasts, and they, in those days, in the 1970s, they regarded England, Britain, as the mecca of new games because all the greatest ideas were coming up in Britain at that time. But it turns out that that gradually fizzled out. Of course, one of the things that was part of the board game renaissance in Britain was the founding of Games and Puzzles magazine, which I was also involved with, and that started in 1972. Anyway, they decided that one of the reasons why games were at that time fizzling out in Britain was the fact that they were not really taken very seriously. They were still being sold in toy shops and regarded as things for kids, not for adults. And they decided that what was really needed was some good, strong, published criticism of games, reviews of games, and since they were already doing this, they thought it would be a good idea if they could get together and introduce this idea of a Spiel des Jahres. And their idea was that it should be not necessarily what they regarded as the best game of the year, but what they regarded as the most significant game of the year. I think there were about 20 people on it when it first started. And it's always been a policy of theirs that nobody on the panel of judges should have anything, any commercial interest or be related in any way to any of the games publishers, so that they could be seen as completely independent. And that's why it became established as a group that knew what it was talking about. But this turned out to be good for the industry as well, because up until the time of the Game of the Year award, it had been up to the manufacturers to push their games to the public. Manufacturers produced games, they sell them to wholesalers who send their reps around to retailers, and then they have to push them to the public. But by establishing a prestigious Game of the Year award, they've now, within a very few years, they reached a situation at which it was the public that was demanding new games because they were reading about these new games that were coming out. There's one other interesting thing I might mention there, and that is that Hare and Tortoise was not exactly a unanimous decision the first time, because when Ravensburger first brought the game out in 1979, they found that it wasn't selling in the shops, chiefly because their reps were having difficulty explaining it. It was a slightly unusual for games at the time. And because the reps were not succeeding in selling it very well, they decided that this was not a good game to have in their range, and they very nearly pulled it out. But then one of their reps couldn't understand this. He took it home, played it with his family, and his family loved it. And then the panel also, some of them ranked some games at the top of their list, others ranked other games at the bottom of their list. And those at the top balanced out those at the bottom. And Hare and Tortoise wasn't at the top of anybody's list, I think. But by the time all the others had balanced each other out, Hare and Tortoise was higher on average than anything else. So that's how it got it. And I might mention, which I'm rather pleased about, other games at that time were Alex Randolph's Twixt, which is still one of my favourite games, Eric Solomon's Alaska, which I think has been republished recently, Sid Sackson's Acquire, which you may know, and I forget the Japanese name, but it was the inventor. Shogun was one of the other games on the up before them.
So you won by playing because the panel were playing the Hare and Tortoise race, and you were the tortoise, and you came in first.
That's right. Yes.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So the initial award wasn't a high-profile thing. They didn't contact you and tell you that you'd won. You weren't invited to the awards ceremony.
It was and it wasn't. They decided that they wanted to. This would interest you as well. They wanted it to be a very prominent award. They wanted the first award to be presented by a government minister. And they chose, they probably went down a list, but a suitable one was the Minister for Families, I think. Not exactly what the post was called, I can't remember. But she said, yes, I'd be glad to give this award, provided it's held in my own constituency, and her constituency was Essen, and that's why Essen has become the World Centre for Games Festivals ever since then.
Brilliant.
Wow. But I believe the story goes that you only found out you'd won when Alex Randolph told you over lunch in London some weeks later.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, it is. I was most surprised because I didn't know. I knew that the game was coming out in Germany, But yeah, I wonder if anybody else is old enough to have ever met Alex Randolph. He was one of the greatest people in the games business. I was so sorry when he died a few years ago. But he's quite legendary as a games inventor. I think he's probably the first person that managed to make a substantial living out of inventing games. But a lot of people now can do so because even in... I'm now reflecting a talk given by one of the founders in 2010. He said that they get about 200, in those days they got about 200 games to sift through and to give their judgment on. And if it won the Spiel des Jahres, then, the sales, in an ordinary course of events, a new game would publish about 2,000 to 5,000 copies of the first issue. But if it won the Game of the Year award, it would be 100 times that amount. So anybody who wins the Game of the Year award now can pretty well retire. It wasn't quite, because mine was the first one, it was not yet prestigious enough for me to have retired.
You need to win again then.
Nevertheless, it kept me going for a few years, which was very helpful.
That's excellent. There's a story, I believe, that in the year 2000, Torres, Wolfgang Kramer game, which we'll come on to, won, and the jury thought, oh, we've made a misstep here. It only sold an extra 200,000 copies based on the award. It's like 200,000 copies of a game is, if you don't know, that's an extraordinary number of games to sell. That's, that's by anybody's standard, that's a huge, huge success. So winning the Spiel des Jahres will change a designer's career.
But that was only five years after Catan, and when Settlers of Catan won the competition, it went from selling pretty well, and they were doing hundreds of thousands of units, but it just transformed with the Spiel des Jahres, and it went up into over 1 million sales, which was unheard of, really, at that time for anything apart from mainstream family games with the backings of the likes of Hasbro and MB and so on. So it was, it's understandable why they were mildly disappointed at only getting 200,000.
Yes.
We'd have been delighted with sales, let alone 200,000 extra sales.
Yes, I mean, it is in Germany. It's a huge, huge award. Germany, where you find what we would regard as hobby games on sale in supermarkets, and you can find most of the Spiel des Jahres winners in charity shops. Over here, Rummy Cub crops up in charity shops, Scotland Yard, and more latterly Codenames and Dixit you'll find. But otherwise, your chances of tracking down a Spiel des Jahres winner in Oxfam pretty slim. But at the same time, for those of us who were kicking around in the 80s and the 90s, the Spiel des Jahres was a useful kind of signpost for what German games were good. What had been nominated, what won. Because otherwise this stuff came in untranslated, sometimes with an English translation typed, photocopied, tucked inside the cellophane.
That's what we used to do. We were bringing the games in from Germany and from other non-English speaking countries. We were getting a variety of people to do the translations, all unpaid, all volunteers. We would yes, they were typed with a typewriter and photocopied, folded up, and stuck in the back of the games. And you'll still sometimes find games of that era with Just Games translations still tucked inside their original German language. And it was mostly German, although there were French games like Descartes and so on that were not translated and brought into the English market at that time.
Okay. Right, so enough about the prize itself. Let's talk about some of the games. And first of all, I want to take the temperature of you lot, because this is an audience participation thing. Your votes are as important as our votes and our opinions. Who knows, feels they know the Spiel des Jahres reasonably well already? Who owns at least one Spiel des Jahres winner? Who owns at least 5? Who owns maybe 10? 20? all of them.
Except Colt Express.
Except Colt Express. For some reason, I don't have a copy of Colt Express, but I've got all the others. What we're going to do, I'm going to take my microphone and come down here for the flip chart. We're going to work through the decades. We're going to run through the 10 games that won in each decade. We're going to grandfather Hare and Tortoise in to the 80s because it won in 1979. But we'll do short descriptions and expert opinions and speed reviews because we've only got about an hour to get through 41 games. This is going to be interesting. And then we'll do a very experimental 3-stage voting process. First of all, we're going to ask who's played the games on the list. Each one goes in a head-to-head. The game that's had the most people play it goes through to the next round. Then it's a popularity contest. That should bring us down to about 3, at which point we go to the expert verdict because it is a jury prize and not a popularity contest, the Spiel des Jahres. Unlike, say, the Origins Award in the States, which is a popular vote, or the Any Awards, many games awards are popular votes. This one, not so much. That will give us one winner for each decade, and then they will face off in a final head-to-head competition, a mix of popular votes and popular acclaim and us. But let's start with the 1980s. Hare and Tortoise grandfathered in. So 1980 Rummy Cub. Someone tell us something about Rummy Cub.
Brilliant.
Rummy Cub is a very simple game, very simple concept, which, like the best games, has many strategies and a lot of decisions to make. It is essentially the card game Rummy played with tiles. There are some minor variations, but that's essentially what it is. And a lot of the most successful games build on established designs and add a wrinkle. And in the case of Rummy Cub, the really critical thing that changes it for most people is the tactile nature of the tiles. The actual rules changes don't appear to be the critical thing that makes the difference. It is the fact that they're little tiles about
You can
that
whack
wide,
them down.
Sort of.
Yeah, they make a lovely noise. Nick and Ellie and I actually played it earlier this week, and it's just delightful pushing tiles around. It's the earliest game on the list because it was actually published, I believe, in Israel in the 1940s, but didn't come out in Germany until 1980, which made it eligible for the Spiel des Jahres. The Spiel des Jahres is only for games published in Germany that year, which is why Hare and Tortoise, which came out in 1972, I think. 74 won the prize in 1979. Okay, who's played Rummy Cub? Out of interest, most of you enjoy. Well, we'll come on to whether you like it or not.
Can I just add?
Yes, of course.
I saw Rummy Cub when I was in Romania, in Bucharest, in about 1975.
Wow.
So I was quite interested to see it, but I was also. Are we giving our opinions and verdicts now?
Yeah, well, it'll go to a popular vote, but we need to. They have world championships. I was on holiday in Sicily. I ran into a bunch of people in Rummy Cub t-shirts. I said, "Who are you?" They said, "We're the Rummy Cub World Championship. Do you want to play?" And I declined. Focus. Who's played Focus? Who knows Focus? Yeah, I thought so. Really not on the panel, yes, and me and Ellie. Who would like to tell us a little about Focus?
You won, Nick.
Focus is you can have a go in a minute, Nick. Focus is a game by the prolific and excellent designer Sid Saxon, several of whose games won Spiel des Jahres, and others should have done. It's an entirely abstract game in which you effectively place cones on top of each other and take pieces on a rectangular grid. Like many of Sid Saxon's games, it's got very interesting mechanism and it is great fun to play, but the end game is too long and it overstays its welcome, and this was a recurrent theme of Sid's designs. But vanished now, almost unknown, I would say.
Yeah, very, very hard to pick up. Actually, until a couple of years ago, you could pick up copies on eBay for £6 in nice condition, which is where I got mine. But yeah, hard to find. I think somebody may have republished it. Also, if you've seen Tack, the James Ernest game based on the novels by, I'm blanking on his name, based on a series of fantasy novels, Tack is not dissimilar. It's a similar game of kind of stack. You create stacks and then the stacks move and can capture other stacks. Clever mechanic. The mechanic is really elegant. Like a lot of Saxon's games, there's a real real elegance to it. Okay, nobody's played Focus. In the vote, let's just check. Nobody's played Focus, unaware of Focus. Focus is not going to win the game of games.
I played Focus.
You played Focus. Well, I don't think that's compared to Rummy Cup. Let's see Rummy Cup again. Yeah.
Right.
So round one is who's played it. Round two is whether people like it. We're going slightly out of order here because I've grouped things. So we'll run through in chronological order and then we'll take the votes. Enchanted Forest, 1982. Can I do this one?
Yeah.
This is we were talking about Alex Randolph. This is an Alex Randolph design, and it's a real shame that this is his only Spiel des Jahres winner, because I hate it. It's a game for small children. It's a roll and move memory game with fairy tale tropes. And at the time, fairy tale tropes and fantasy were kind of new. There weren't that many fantasy games. Dungeons and Dragons was big, but it hadn't broken through to the family market. So there was a real sense of novelty here. But it's a horrible game. You're rolling, you're moving, you're trying to remember what's under each fir tree. But then there's a take that mechanic where players can intercept each other and send them back to the start. And this is the kind of mechanic that German games design has evolved out over the years because it's not fun. I'm prepared to be counteracted on this. I'm prepared to, if anyone in the audience wants to stand up and say that it's the best game ever, by all means, but I will fight you. I won't, I'm tired and old. I don't like Enchanted Forest. For me, it is literally the worst of the Spiel des Jahres winners. I think it was a misstep.
It's the only game on this list that I would decline to play if somebody suggested it.
In the West Hall, starting now. Loads of free games to win. Head there now. Thank you.
Stay here.
Stay.
Please stay.
They got Enchanted Forest first, so.
So Enchanted Forest is a notable anomaly in the quality. The art is lovely.
Yes.
It does look nice, which is sort of damning it with faint praise. I know that, but yes, and it doesn't have any of Randolph's later or even earlier. The brilliant touches that he showed in so many of his games, all absent here.
Okay. Right. Okay. We'll come to whether you played it or not in a minute. The 1983 winner was Scotland Yard, also from Ravensburger, the same publisher. I've grouped that in the voting against Sherlock Holmes for obvious reasons, but out of chronological order. Scotland Yard.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. There is a pub quiz in the West Hall starting now.
You told us.
Loads of free prizes to win. Head there now. Good luck.
I'll talk about Scotland Yard if you want. It's a sort of classic cat and mouse game set around London, and it's a one versus many game. The one is Mr. X, and he goes kind of undercover and pops up at intervals during the game, and the others are the detectives. And it's an absolutely brilliant game because you have limited resources as the detectives. You have to give in your tickets if you're going on taxis or undergrounds or buses. You can travel around London on different modes of transport, but every time you use a ticket, it goes to Mr. X, who has these mounting piles of different transport he can take, and you have to catch Mr. X. It's a simple cat and mouse thing, but it's very clever.
You know how he's
one of the first asymmetric games, certainly I would think the first asymmetric mass market game.
Yeah, if you've played Fury of Dracula, you've played Scotland Yard with knobs on. If you played Letters from Whitehall, you've played Scotland Yard with knobs on. It's the grandfather of hidden movement games, essentially.
Dissenting opinion on it is that by modern standards, it's awful. As a cooperative one versus one game, because it's really interesting. I haven't played many of the older Spiel des Jahres until James called me up and said, "What do you know about Spiel des Jahres?" And I panicked. And you can see modern mechanics have derived from a lot of these things. They've all been hugely influential, but they've all learnt as we've gone through the decades. And Scotland Yard, as a narrative-friendly game, which you sit down literally with your family and play, is fine. As a cooperative challenge, it isn't, because it has perfect information. It is essentially one person versus one person. It's not one person versus a team, because the team all know exactly what they all know, so we all can plan each other's move, which means you end up with an alpha gamer, not me, obviously, running the entire game from one side. And that's fine, that's how co-op games were, but there's huge many now better examples of it.
In some ways, the game My First Scotland Yard, which is aimed at 6-year-olds, is technically probably a better game if you're 6 years old. So it's more elegant.
Yeah, I mean, it's still marketed, it's still at TV advertised around Christmas. Extraordinary longevity. Okay, let's move on. We really don't have an awful lot of time. 1984, Theo, tell us about Railway Rivals.
Railway Rivals was designed by David Watts, who was a Welsh geography teacher, and he designed it to engage his pupils in geography. It's about building railways between settlements. I think the first one was actually based on a map of Wales, but it became more successful with maps of the whole of the UK and the whole of the USA. He started selling them widely as they were paper that you drew your routes on them and then wiped it off. So they were laminated paper, hand laminated by David, rolled up and put into mailing tubes, which is the classic packaging of the early Railway Rivals. The reason that it was eligible for the 1984 Spiel des Jahres was that Schmidt-Spieler, a very large and successful German publisher, now swallowed up, published it as Dampfrost, and it is widely known throughout continental Europe by people all over, outside the Anglophone world, as Dampfrost. It's the original version used dice to determine where the races were, because you build your railway network and then you will race over your networks. The original one used dice, and then it evolved to use cards, which reduced the random nature of it. Subsequently, Ian Livingstone, who was a big fan of it, and Steve Jackson adopted it into the Games Workshop board game range, and that gave it a new lease of life. And it has a huge fan base of people who design their own maps, and their families have 38
different maps we have in our family.
But
I did an audit of my brothers and sisters. We have 38 maps.
But it's been out of print in the UK, in the English language, since the Games Workshop edition of 1984 or 1985?
85.
The mid-80s. Unavailable unless you buy a copy of Dampfrost from ebay.de or over at Essen. Which to my mind is a crying shame, because I think on the pad, it was one of my gateway games. I bought my copy in a tube from David Watts at Games Fair back in the day. Theo was there as well. It's lovely. Some people think it's a bit dated because the second half of the game is basically roll and move. You're rolling dice and moving your train in a race. I love it. I absolutely love it. Let's move on very quickly. I think we could wax lyrical about Railway Rivals for a long time. 1986, 1985, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, now back in print, widely available from Istari. Nick? David, do you know this one?
No.
You don't? Okay, Nick, do you know this one?
Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, excellent narrative game, again a bit solo. If you played any of escape room games, Unlock, Exit, then they derive very clearly from this. You get a newspaper, you get a map of London, you get a directory of London, and then you're essentially reading narratives which direct you to go to various places depending on the deductions you make and the clues you gather. At the end of a scenario, I think there's like 10 in the box. You go to Sherlock Holmes and you present your findings in the case. Have you discovered the murderer, etc., etc.
Yes, and he tells you you're an idiot. It's known colloquially as Sherlock Holmes Insulting Detective.
Yes.
Because he is very, very rude about your solution.
The object of the game is to solve the puzzle faster than Sherlock Holmes. It is, frankly, I think, almost impossible to do that, but the journey is fascinating. And I do know that there are lots of people who don't even bother to try and solve the case. They just try and explore the story of that part of London, and they enjoy the narrative, the storytelling of it.
So, Ellie, you played it recently. How did you find it?
Yeah, I've found that it's fine if you don't mind reading lots. It's not great for my family. It's a really good solo player game because you're sitting there reading things. I think the system's brilliant. The directory's great because you really can choose your own path. You know, you can work out who you want to go and speak to, and then you can turn to that. And there's lots of different sort of starter clues that you can go in any direction. I really like that. But yeah, it's not one that I'm going to be bringing to the table with my boys. They'll just switch off.
It's good enough that there have been recent sequels set in H.P. Lovecraft, Arkham, and a sort of 1930s New York gumshoe one. So the system itself can derive into any narratives.
Yeah. And it works well with a couple of people playing it cooperatively and sharing and exploring the story together. So it's also significant because it's the first Spiel des Jahres game that had a female designer.
Yes.
She was part of the team, so there's a later game that...
No, because Scotland Yard also has a female designer on the team. Scotland Yard has got like 5 credited designers, one of whom is a woman. I know because I was writing about this last night.
You're absolutely right.
But there are fewer female women who have won the Spiel des Jahres or been part of a design team than there are men called Werner who have won the Spiel des Jahres. It's a disgraceful record for equality. It's quite appalling. Let's move on straight away to Heimlich & Co. 1986. Wolfgang Kramer's first Spiel des Jahres win. If you don't know the name Wolfgang Kramer, you will by the end of this panel because he's won the Spiel des Jahres more than anyone else. Does anyone know Heimlich & Co. well? It's known in the UK or in the English-speaking world as Top Secret Spies.
Yeah.
I'm happy to dive in on this one. Introduce 2 key things: the scoring track round the edge of the board and meeple. It's the first game with flat wooden people that stand up on the board. They don't look like the Carcassonne meeple, but acknowledged as the first game with meeple. It's a hidden identity roll and move game in which there are non-player characters. And the idea is there's a safe somewhere on the board. When one of the players' pieces lands on the safe, everyone scores the number of points of the number of the space they're on the board. The board is circular. So it's hidden movement. Nobody knows what color you're playing, and you can move any piece on your turn. This means that it is quite possible for one of the non-player characters to win the game. And if you don't think that's hysterically funny, then I think you're probably in the wrong panel. I love Heimlich & Co. I think it's a great family game, and it's very clever, and it introduced a lot of very clever new ideas. At the same time, it's kind of drifted into obscurity, and almost nobody knows it, let alone plays it anymore. Anyone else? No. No? Okay. 1987, very swiftly. Auf Achs. On the Axle, on another Wolfgang Kramer. He won it back-to-back years. A game about trucking in Germany. Theo, you said you'd got them all. Any any memories at all?
Auf Achs is probably the second most disappointing game on the list. It's about trucking. It's got really very little that's notable about it. It's got no notable mechanism. It's got better than average art, but only just.
Yes.
And it's a real surprise that it got through at all.
Yeah, I have a theory that Wolfgang Kramer was trying to do a Monopoly killer. He thought he'd identified the mechanics that make Monopoly work and were trying to build them into a better game. And it's not a better game. But it has little nods to Monopoly. They're essentially chance cards in it. And one of them is your truck wins second prize in a beauty contest. That's a direct Monopoly reference. He knew what he was doing. It has not aged well. I don't think it was good when it came out, but it certainly hasn't aged well. Also, it's never had an English translation. That's usually a mark that no one can see the commercial benefit in translating this game into English. Let's move swiftly on from Auf Achs. Barbarossa. Anyone blank looks? I can do this one as well. Klaus Teuber's first Spiel des Jahres. The story of the Spiel des Jahres is essentially the story of Wolfgang Kramer and Klaus Teuber fighting to have the most wins. This is Klaus Teuber's first win, and it's essentially, what's the game with Play-Doh? It's Pictionary with Play. It's essentially Rapido with extra game mechanics in there. You make a model out of Play-Doh, and other players have to try and identify it, but they can identify letters within the word and kind of parts of it, and it's been republished recently. It has a certain charm. The trouble is second-hand copies are full of 30-year-old Play-Doh, which I don't recommend. Not Play-Doh, plasticine.
It's easy to replace the modelling material. The thing that was really clear, I love this game, and I was entranced by it when it first arrived, because it predated Play-Doh. It predated...
Rapido.
Rapido. And the Barbarossa theme, Redbeard, was very much tacked on. It's not at all significant to it, except that when you get your keyword to make the thing you want to represent, and then when you make it, you need to score the most points. Everybody's made their own little sculptures. To score the most points, you need to be in the middle of the people guessing it. The ones that guessed very early are too easy and don't score well. The ones that don't get guessed or get guessed late also don't score well. So it's a really sophisticated mechanic to encourage you to be clever but not too clever. And the other thing that's really satisfying about it is that when it can only be guessed twice, and each time it gets guessed, you stick a little plastic arrow in the sculpture, which is a wonderfully tactile thing to do. And when you have slightly aggressive players, they can be quite fierce with their arrows and do their best to destroy the sculpture with a great thrust through. It's good tactile fun. So.
Okay. And the final one of the 1980s is Cafe International. Again, republished recently. This was a Mattel game. Mattel Germany was weird at the time. There's a German folk hero called Till Eulenspiel. You're nodding wisely. Till Eulenspiel's big shtick, what he does is he does enormous poos. He will come into a situation where there's a fair in the middle of a village square, and Till Eulenspiel will do an enormous poo in the middle of it with hilarious consequences. Mattel Germany decided to do a board game about this. Simultaneously, they did Suppen Kasper, which is a game about trying to follow a perfect diet, and each round ends when it's won by the player closest to the ideal weight, when one of the other players either dies of anorexia or explodes from overeating. This is Mattel! The people who do Barbie published this, and then they published Cafe International, which won the Spiel des Jahres. And it's a game about seating people at a restaurant. Who knows? Again,
I know it.
Oh, David, tell us. Give us your verdict.
Games on the list that I do know, and I thoroughly enjoy playing even now. So I can't imagine. I like that sort of game, a tile placing game, positional game. I can't imagine it being wildly popular now.
No. Tell them how it works.
Oh, you have the board. On the board is printed a set of tables. I forget how many. Must be at least 36, 40 or so. And each table has 4 people sitting at it. There are 4 chairs there, 2 for men, 2 for women. And each table has a nationality associated with it. And you have tiles which you play in much the same way as Carcassonne later. I forget how many tiles you have.
You have 5 to start, don't you?
Limited number.
Yes.
You have 5 tiles
5
to start.
tiles, is it? Yeah, that's right.
And you have to seat the people at the tables.
If you can't, you have to put them sitting at the bar, and gradually, as there are more and more people sitting at the bar that haven't been placed, they score penalty points, and the more people you get sitting at the bar, the more penalty points they score. And needless to say, there are a few joker tiles as well that can be any nationality.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a game full of clever ideas, but I have to admit I don't find it enormously engrossing.
I I've actually, we played it last week, me for the first time, and I actually found it, I've been thinking about it since, which is always a good sign.
Yeah.
It's essentially a very abstract game. There are rules about seating. You can't have more than 2 men at a table together. You can't have more than 2 women at a table together. It is not something that would get published today. There is no non-binary genders.
Also, the art is the slitty-eyed Chinese people and thick-lipped African people, and it's quite German in the 1980s.
Yeah, it's questionable.
Some of the art is questionable.
Yeah.
I will certainly accept that. And essentially, it could just be colours.
All of it.
But putting nationalities on it gives it a certain amount of charm. And you have tables where you can have either an Englishman or an English person or a German person. And that could be red or yellow. It absolutely could be. But I thought actually the cafe conceit on it was a very charming way to take what was essentially a very abstract game and make it much nicer. And I liked it
Yeah, I liked
quite
it.
a lot.
Yeah, it's clever enough. Okay, let's blast through this list in terms of some votes. Popularity, if a game survived the test of time and people know it and have played it, then that's a valid reason for it to get through to the next stage of the voting. Let's put Enchanted Forest up against Cafe International. Both from fairly major publishers, and who knows Enchanted Forest or has a copy of Enchanted Forest? Only a few, that's interesting. Who knows Cafe International or has a copy of Cafe International?
Oh, no.
Good Lord, that's Cafe International going through. That's extraordinary. Enchanted Forest, like Scotland Yard, gets TV advertised by Ravensburger. I'm genuinely astounded by that. Right, Scotland Yard versus Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Who knows, has played, owns a copy of, or any of the above of Scotland Yard? Quite a few. Who owns, knows, has played, has a copy of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective? Oh, it's quite close, but it's Scotland Yard. It's got, I believe, yes, Scotland Yard goes through there. Sorry, Sherlock. Railway Rivals. Who knows it? Oh my Lord, that's so sad. I'm genuinely, yeah. Versus Alf Achs. Who owns, has played, or has, that's one in the audience. I have it, but I'm not going to admit to it because I want it to go out. Alf Achs goes out. Splendid. Do you like it? No. It's one of the, if you've got a Spiel des Jahres collection, you kind of have to have it, but it's big, and I really begrudge it the shelf space because it has no redeeming. You're a truck dispatcher. You run a fleet of trucks, but you have one truck. That's it. And it has rules like you can only have one truck in Nuremberg at a time, or this motorway can only have one truck on. It's just, it doesn't work. Anyway, and then we have Barbarossa versus Heimlich & Co. Wolfgang Kramer's first game versus Klaus Teuper's first game. Who knows Barbarossa? Who's played Barbarossa? Knows anything about it? Matt has. 1, 2, and a couple on the panel. Heimlich & Co. Who's played, knows, loves. It's by a very, very short nose. It's Heimlich & Co. And I'm quite grateful. Let's move on to the 1990s. These are games that you will know. Well, some of them you will know. And these ones are in chronological order. Adel Verpflichtet. Adel Verpflichtet has a bunch of names. It was released in America by Avalon Hill as Adel Verpflichtet because Avalon Hill had all the sense of a bucket of bolts at that particular point. But over here it was known as Fair Means or Foul or Hoity-Toity. Yeah. And it's a game of competitive antiques trading, auctioning, and occasionally stealing. Anyone want to dive in?
Yeah? Go.
No, you go.
Yeah, it's really a game of, it feels like a game of two halves. The game where you have money to spend, and then the second half where you've run out of money and you're just trying to steal other people's things. It's quite clever. It's all simultaneous action. You can either go to the auction house and spend money or to get new antiques, or you can play a thief at the auction house and steal other people's money if they're spending money, and then, or you can go and exhibit your things in a country house. If you go to the country house, instead of exhibiting, you can also steal other people's things in the country house, or you can play a detective card to try and stop the thieves. So it's all simultaneous. It's quite clever and elegant. It's slick. You're trying to work your way around the board, so up to the top table, and you do that by being having the best exhibition each time you exhibit, and those are the antiques cards, and it's the greatest collection. So you're trying to sort of collect a set of antiques that is a continuous set because they're all in different categories. Yeah, it's good.
It is good. Two things. First of all, it's a Klaus Teuber game. It's Klaus Teuber's second win. So he and Wolfgang Kramer are now 2-2, neck and neck. The other thing is I've got my system wrong already, because we were supposed to work out the winner of the 1980s. Now, grandfathering Hare and Tortoise. Again, this is head-to-head. We know about Hare and Tortoise. If you've played Hare and Tortoise, this is not a do you own it, have you experienced it. This is which is your favourite. Hare and Tortoise versus Rummy Cub. On a show of hands, panel included. Who thinks Hare and Tortoise should go through? That's extraordinarily modest of you. Who thinks Rummy Cub should go through? Ooh, that's interesting. Can we see Hare and Tortoise again?
Can I say why I think Rummy Cub should go through?
Yes. Because you don't value your life.
In Board Game Cafe, we get people like you guys coming in, and you guys know things like Catan and Carcassonne and Colt Express. We get people who come in and they ask for Monopoly, they ask for Cluedo, and they ask for Rummy Cub. And I'm afraid we don't ask for Hare and Tortoise so much, occasionally. But people who play normal games that normal non-gamers play Rummy Cub, and it's the only one on this list that people like that come in and ask for.
And I'd now like to talk a little bit about Hare and Tortoise.
Yes, we haven't described Hare and Tortoise. Oh my God.
Hare and Tortoise I feel has not been very well promoted by Gibson's over the last few years. Gibson's own the rights, and they've had it in print almost continuously, haven't they, since you...
They published it from 1986 to somewhere in the early 2000s. Then they republished it in 2008, and they've kept it on the on the range then.
Part of the problem is that Gibson's as a publisher, and I'm very fond of Gibson's, but as a publisher, they're not on many hobby gamers' radar. They used to be, and now they're not so much. I bring Hare and Tortoise out frequently at games clubs that I'm involved in, where, perhaps not surprisingly, I am one of the older members. And it seems, my experience is that, in general, gamers under 40 haven't heard of Hare and Tortoise, and they, by and large, they're enthralled by it, and I get asked for it again and again. So once people know it, they love it.
Yes.
Rummy Cub, which I think is a great game, is a much more of an entry-level game, and it has a place. But I think that the excitement that Hare and Tortoise engenders amongst hobby gamers when they meet it for the first time, and they are absolutely gobsmacked to find out that it's over 40 years old.
Yes, that's the thing. I've played it quite recently as well, and it still feels completely fresh. It's still a really clever mechanic. It's a diceless race game. It's a randomless race game. You're spending carrot cards to propel your character forward, but it's on a logarithmic scale. So to move 3 spaces, you need to spend 3 + 2 + 1, so 6 carrots. And then it's all about the way you replenish carrots in your hand and the clever systems for that. It is a delight. It is a simply brilliant game.
Can I add something?
Of course.
To that about Hare and Tortoise? It's been published by various publishers at various times. The most delightful design that I've seen is there are 2 editions published, one in China and one in Japan last year, which have got completely new take on the design and even on the animals. The animals viewing the race from the outside are all jungle animals.
Oh, nice.
So that's absolutely delightful. If you can get hold of that, that's good. And the other thing I want to say is that when I go to Germany, which is quite often, and I get introduced as the inventor of Hase und Igel, people say, "Oh yeah, my parents used to play that."
The other thing, one of the things that makes Hare and Tortoise so special, apart from the use of the logarithmic spending, is the fact that you can't win if you've got more than a certain number of cards at the end, and that number increases as people finish. So the first player home can't do it if they've got more than 10, I think it is.
Yep.
And then it goes up to 20, 30, 40. So it gets easier, in one sense, it gets easier to finish, but
It's really a game of carrot management, isn't it?
It is carrot management.
Carrot management.
And it can be desperately frustrating and hugely funny to watch somebody just misjudge it. There are options to do random. You can, if you wish, choose some random benefits. So it can appeal to gamblers, and watching gamblers get it horribly wrong has its own delicious pleasure.
Yes. Anyway, so bearing that in mind, you don't have to bear in mind what the panel have said, what your panel of experts have said. Let's do the vote again. Those in favour of Hare and Tortoise going through? Let's do it simply like that. Those in favour of Hare and Tortoise? Those in favour of Rummy Cub? It's Hare and Tortoise. Excellent. Cafe International versus Scotland Yard. Those in favour of Cafe International? Those in favour of Scotland Yard?
No.
Yes, good. Splendid.
Sorry, I'm wrong way around.
Railway Rivals versus Heimlich and Co. Those in favour of Railway Rivals?
Yes, because he's here.
Those in favour of Heimlich and Co.
I've never played it.
Oh, tighter than I expected. Tighter. Theo! That was Railway Rivals. Okay, now.
Can I just say that one of the reasons why I'm not voting on some of these is I can't always hear what you're saying.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
Bad hearing anyway, and I get very confused by other noises going on.
Okay, so the panel of experts. This is for you because I'm madly biased and I'm comparing and stuff. Hare and Tortoise, Scotland Yard, Railway Rivals. I would say that is probably the cream of the crop from the 1980s.
So what was the middle one of those?
Hare and Tortoise, Scotland Yard, Railway Rivals. Can you come up with a consensus on what should go through?
I've not played Railway Rivals.
Well, I would say Railway Rivals. I'm sorry, David, but I expect the consensus will be different.
Of the ones I played, Hare and Tortoise, of those.
Okay.
We have to come up with a consensus. What do we think?
Shall I come in? I'm really torn. I don't think it's Scotland Yard. I like Scotland Yard a great deal. I think it's Railway Rivals or Hare and Tortoise.
Yeah.
That's my feeling as well.
Oh. I don't know.
Well, toss a coin.
I'm going to say it's for pure enjoyment, Railway Rivals. For cleverness and longevity, Hare and Tortoise. I'm going to go with my gut, not my head. I'm going to go with Railway Rivals. So I think that's Railway Rivals going through. David, a very distinguished second place for Hare and Tortoise.
I don't count anyway.
Okay, Railway Rivals.
Won the award.
Right, where were we? 1990s. We're going to have to speed up a bit. Drunter and Druber, under and over. This is another Klaus Teuber. 3 wins. Anyway, Theo.
Yeah.
Or David, do you know Drunter and Druber? Okay.
No,
Do you know it?
I don't know it.
Oh, okay.
No.
It's an ingenious game of, I suppose it's bridge building. It's tile laying, basically. It's a tile laying game. It's got lovely art. They all do, generally. To get this far, generally the quality of the visual design is very high.
Which was not always the case in the early 1990s.
It's best with 4 players, and you're placing tiles and competing to make routes that will score you points. So it just doesn't sound very engaging, but it is.
It's basically multiplayer Snake,
Can I just
essentially.
say, It sounds very engaging to me. That's just the sort of game I like. So I must seek out a copy. I don't know if it's still being published, but if not...
I think in Germany, I think you can find one in Essen, certainly on the second-hand stores in Essen. Yeah, multiplayer Snake with lavatories. You're not allowed to build over a public convenience.
Yes.
And there's a very clever shouting mechanic for voting whether people should be allowed to go build over them. Let's move on very swiftly. We're very low on time. Bright. It's a cycling game. It's the only sports simulation in the list.
It's a very simple simulation. It is a simulation, and it's a race game, and essentially you've got a team of 3 cyclists in the usual way, and their relative positions are significant. It's not a hugely accurate simulation of cycling, as there are some, but it captures the flavour of cycling races.
It does, actually, the mechanics, it's very dice heavy, but it does, you'll find that a peloton will form and then racers will break away from the peloton, and it mimics that quite well. It's a bit of a slog by modern standards. It runs long.
Yeah, outstays its welcome because it's quite repetitive.
Yeah. Okay, enough about that. Call my bluff. I can do this one. It's liar's dice with the wildcard mechanic. That's all it is, literally. Whether the Germans had never come across liar's dice before, I don't know. But that's all the game is. Nice dice, nice dice cups. Liar's dice with the wildcard mechanic. The ones are wildcards rather than ones. Anyone strong feelings? No, let's move straight on. Theo, you were about to have strong feelings.
It's got, the wrinkle in it is that you've got the wild dice, the star die. You move the marker as a marker that moves around a board. It's not a scoring marker, but it indicates how you're progressing through the sequence that you can raise your bids. And the star, the random die, it crops up at limited intervals, so you can't always use the random. You can't always bid the star.
Okay.
So it's got some constraints.
It's clever enough.
So
We have 30 minutes to get through 30 games, so I'm going to have to put the pedal down here. Manhattan.
Yep. Manhattan's a tower building game. Each player has a certain number of blocks, either 1, 2, 3 or 4 high, and each round you select the blocks you're going to use, and then you place them in different sections of the board which represent the different blocks of Manhattan in New York. And you're trying to win the tower by having your block on the top. So there are different strategies you can play. You get points if you have the tallest tower. You get points for majority of your towers in the area. So you can try and get lots by making them small, or you can try and trump other people's. It's a real tussle between players.
Interesting use of trump there.
Yes.
Okay,
well,
Andreas
and
Seyfarth,
tower.
I believe, who went on to design Puerto Rico and a whole bunch of others. It was his first win, and an early game by him. Let's move straight on. 1995, Settlers of Catan, Die Siedler von Catan. Everyone heard of this? Do we need to talk about it?
No.
You know Settlers. Okay, El Grande, Wolfgang Kramer again. Who wants to talk about it?
Considered by some to be the greatest area control game, and I'm not one of them, with the greatest area control game there is, and certainly the beginnings of area control. The gimmick is that you have a tower into which you drop the pieces that you're going to, as it were, the settlers, and it randomizes what comes out and what can get placed. So it's got a very abstract skeleton, but it's got this randomizing structure in it, which means that you can't solve the game. It's got cards that create variations in terms of objectives, rewards, targets and so on. It's got huge replay.
Yeah, it's the most complex Spiel des Jahres winner. It's got the heaviest weight on Board Game Geek. It's a 3.08 or something like that last I checked.
It's compelling to play.
Yeah.
You want to play it again and again.
Yes, if this for me is the great lesser known. If I could persuade anyone to go out and play one Spiel Des Jahres winner that they've not played before, it would probably be El Grande. I think it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Let's move straight on. Mississippi Queen, not a masterpiece. Who knows Mississippi Queen? I'll talk about it. I'll do this one very quickly. Racing paddle steamers on the Mississippi, quite a clever mechanic with your paddle wheels on your little boat indicate how much coal you've got left and the speed you're traveling at. It's pleasant enough. You form the river out of geometric tiles as well, and sometimes you have to pick up passengers from islands, which means you have to stop and decelerate. There's a charming ramming mechanic, which gets particularly brutal if I play with my family. That's kind of it, really.
It's very pleasing to look at. It is charming. It's a relatively simple mechanic. It has a little bit of take that in it, but not enough to be distressing to people who don't like that sort of thing. It's lightweight, and it's particularly with its expansion Black Queen, it has high replay value.
Okay. Elfenland. And people going, oh, I never heard of it. It's Alan Moon. It's Alan Moon who did Ticket to Ride a few years later. It's kind of the antecedent to Ticket to Ride. Alan Moon very much ploughing one furrow in that kind of route creation, route capturing thing. You're elves journeying around a fantasy kingdom. You're a boot. You play a little wooden boot. Anyone got strong feelings about Elfenland? Nobody has strong feelings about Elfenland. That tells you an awful lot, I think. Tikal. Wolfgang Kramer again. And I think this is... Let me get this right. This is Wolfgang Kramer's... No, because he did Torres as well. But, okay, Tikal, this is the one where he draws neck and neck with Klaus Teuber. If you look at the 1990s, Klaus Teuber, someone else, Klaus Teuber, Wolfgang Kramer, someone else, Wolfgang Kramer. That's like half the games that year, that decade, were designed by two people. Although it is... No, Tikal is him with Michael... which did he do with Michael Kiesling?
Michael Kiesling did... he led on Tikal and he assisted on Torres.
Yes, a name pops up from nowhere. Michael Kiesling, who he? He did Azul. 20 years later, almost 20 years later, he does Azul. Extraordinary. Anyway, Tikal, again, anyone got strong feelings on Tikal?
It's good. Yeah, it's good, it's solid, it's got, visually and tactilely, it's really pleasing, as is Torres. So it's got a Central American flavour to it, Mayans or Aztecs or whatever, and it's and the play is satisfying, but very few people seem to nominate it as amongst their top games. It's a game that everybody's happy to play, but very few people actually advocate, bring it to the table.
Yeah, okay. I personally love it, but that is personal taste. Right, let's do some voting. Let's just go down this. Adel Verpflichtet versus Drunter und Drüber, Teuber versus Teuber. Who thinks, who knows them first of all to get us down to half the list? Are you aware of, have you experienced, have you played, do you own any of the above? Adel Verpflichtet? Or fair means or foul or hoity-toity. How about Drunter und Drüber? Just Matt and a couple of panelists. Okay. Reifenbright versus Call My Bluff. Those who own, have experienced whatever, Reifenbright. Blimey. And Call My Bluff? Or Liar's Dice in any... Liar's Call My Bluff goes through, Reifenbright's out. Manhattan. Okay, and who's experienced this thing, Settlers of Catan? Or, come across it somewhere? Yeah, no great surprises there. El Grande versus Mississippi Queen. Who's come across El Grande? Oh, that warms my heart, it really does. And Mississippi Queen? A surprise, a good number, but El Grande goes through. Good. Elfenland versus Tikal. Elfenland, scattering. Tikal, more. Okay. So that's good. Now, the popular vote. So that's Adel Verpflichtet versus Call My Bluff. Who thinks Adel Verpflichtet should go through?
Adel.
Back in the day, we thought Adel Verpflichtet was going to be the breakthrough game, the one that would bring German games to the masses, and then it did. We thought someone was going to put an Antiques Roadshow license on it and make a mint, and it didn't happen. Call My Bluff. Who thinks Call My Bluff should go through? Yeah, okay. Settlers of Catan versus El Grande. Who thinks Settlers should go? The great gateway game, the 30 million copies sold. Who thinks El Grande should go through? Oh, that's card vote. Conference. No, I'm going to overrule the card vote. Let's see that again. Settlers of Catan. Okay, and 2 over there, and El Grande.
Settlers.
You have to be down the rabbit hole to get El Grande.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
this prize is not about being down our rabbit hole. Catan is the way to bring people into the rabbit hole, and it does it day after day, 20 years later.
Yeah.
It changes people's lives. It brings people into this hobby, and it brings them into our world. I haven't played El Grande, so I can't comment on that, but Catan is the thing that changes it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Also, the numbers slightly higher. Okay, Adel Verflichtet, Settlers of Catan, Tikal. Panel vote. Adel Verflichtet, Settlers of Catan, Tikal. Which one goes through?
Catan.
Catan.
Okay, that seems to be... David, are you in agreement?
Yep.
Yep, okay. Settlers of Catan for the 90s. Thank you so much. As we get more familiar with the games, we can belt through these much faster. Torres, Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, again, building towers, very like Sagrada. Do I mean Sagrada? Santorini. I'm dreadful with names. Very like slightly more complicated Santorini. Anyone strong opinions on Torres?
No,
It's a nice abstract.
yeah.
Yeah, it's pleasant enough.
The little towers are lovely.
Yeah.
Yes, putting stuff on stuff is just pleasing.
The copy I've got.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a very plastic thing.
Carcassonne. David, you mentioned Carcassonne earlier on.
Yes, of games not invented by me, this is my favourite.
Fantastic. It does. I mean, as a gateway game, it has the immediacy that you can start playing. There's no setup. You take the tiles out of the box, you find the starting tile, go. Which is amazing for, the setup on Catan is a problem. It takes a long time to set up that board and put everything in place and explain what it all means. Carcassonne has that immediacy, which I think is brilliant. I'm assuming that everyone's more or less familiar with it.
In 3 weeks' time, I'm going to Carcassonne to play Carcassonne. That's the whole purpose. We're going to play Carcassonne and then come home.
Wow. To have your
I
lifestyle
hope
thing.
you understand the scoring mechanism. My issue with Carcassonne is it has a scoring mechanism that has changed a lot, that has to be printed on sheets of paper so that people can understand it. And I have explained the rules for Carcassonne about 100 times and never once have people got the scoring mechanism straight away. And that may be because my rules explanation is god-awful. But it's really complicated as a way to win the game. I'm putting down all these lovely tiles, it's a great game, it's lovely, you're building a town, it's great. But how do you win the game, it's horribly complicated, all this stuff happens at the end, points go bleh.
You can streamline it enormously in early plays by leaving out the farmers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just concentrating on building the roads and the cities and scoring those.
And pick up your tile at the end of your go rather than the beginning.
Yes.
That's very good. I'd never thought about that. Okay, I'm assuming we're mostly familiar with Carcassonne. Let's move straight on. Villa Paletti.
Yep.
Now, this is a Marmite game, if ever there was one. This is the only stacking game to win the Spiel des Jahres. And Nick and Ellie and I played it a few days ago.
And Nick won despite the fact he knocked the whole thing down.
No bitterness there then.
It's deeply strategic, requires careful planning.
It's good. It's got lots of different columns. You put all the columns out. You roll a dice which has 4 different colours on, and you have to move one of those coloured columns up to the next level. And when you don't think you can do it, then you can say, I can't do it, and someone else can have a go. You might knock the whole thing down. Or you can, if nobody wants to have a go, you put the next layer on, and then you can take columns from the bottom or from the middle, and you see how high you can get up. It's clever. The different columns are different lengths, so some are easy to take out and some aren't. Some are worth more points than others.
And I suspect it's much better for the fact that it's hand-carved wood. If you did an edition today, it would be very finely manufactured in a factory, and all the pieces would be identical, which would remove a lot of the charm.
No, they're designed to be different sizes. That is intentional. That's part of the design.
Okay.
It's from Klaus Zock, who are the great German manufacturers of stacking games and games with weird bits of wood. They know their tolerances on wood cutting. I'm a bit of a fanboy of Zock. Anyway, Villa Paletti, the thing about Villa Paletti is that it won the year that everybody thought Puerto Rico was going to win. So it gets a lot of hate for that. But Puerto Rico is not a family game, and it's an award for family games. Let's move on very swiftly. Alhambra. Which kind of bubbles under the surface. Alhambra, David. Sorry.
I don't think I've actually played it.
Have you not? It's another tile layer. I thought it would be right up your street.
That sounds nice. Yes,
Yeah.
I fancy that.
It's lovely.
It's a tile layer, and you're taking. There are 4 different currencies of different colours, and you're taking different parts that you're going to put in your Alhambra. And there's some of them have walls around them, and you're trying to connect a long wall without shafting yourself by not being able to put pieces in, because once you put walls there, you can't put other pieces in. And it's nice.
It's lovely. It's worth saying that Alhambra and Carcassonne have the thing, you play Carcassonne, you build something that looks nothing like the city of Carcassonne. You play Alhambra, you build something that looks nothing like the Alhambra Palace. But you feel that you've constructed something really interesting along the way. Ticket to Ride, Alan Moon. One of the 3 great gateway games along with Carcassonne and Catan. Do we need to talk about Ticket to Ride?
No.
Do we need to? Okay, let's move straight on to Niagara. This is another bit of a Marmite one. This is a game with an actual waterfall in it, except it's not water. You put the board on the boxes so that there's a drop at the end, and then the river is composed of plastic discs, and at each turn a new disc goes in the top of the river and shunts the other discs down, but the river divides, so you're not quite sure which way the discs are going to go. This all sounds great, except it's a game of gathering diamonds and other gems from the rocks at the top of a waterfall while you're in a small canoe. And for some reason, you can only fit one gem in your canoe at a time. And at this point, you just go, yeah, it's all right, I suppose. It's silly. I mean, it's quite, with the right crowd, it's strategic, but it's fundamentally quite silly.
Yeah, it's boring.
It's the first Spiel Des Jahres game that I declined to play.
Yeah.
I looked at it, I read the rules, and I thought, no, there's better stuff to play this afternoon, and I never went back to it.
Yeah, I got it as a present from my wife, and it was kind of, oh, thank you, darling. So yeah, we do. I've got kids. Kids enjoy it because stuff goes off the edge of the water. If your canoe goes off the edge of the waterfall, that's funny. It's great. Anyway, but yes, Thurn und Taxis. Now this is the Safe Arts. This is their consolation prize for not getting it the year Villa Paletti won it. Thurn und Taxis. Anyone strong opinions? I have strong opinions. It's Ticket to Ride on expert mode. If you love Ticket to Ride, you owe it to yourself to get Thurn und Taxis, because it's a clever game about building the early German postal system. And if that doesn't get your gut blood pumping, then you're not a real gamer. Anyone got anything to add?
How can we top that?
Seriously, it's very clever. It's a very clever game. It's quite a thinky game. It's heavier than your usual Spiel des Jahres winner, but it's quite fun. Zularetto, 2007.
It's pretty nice. It's very cute. It's a proper family weight game. It's fitting tiles in. You get advance notice. You're building a zoo and you're trying to get sets of animals together. And new animals will arrive in a coach, which is a lovely little tile of its own. It's nice. It's cute. It's a family game. It's better than Carcassonne.
Better with or better than?
Than.
I would disagree very strongly. I like it enough. It doesn't feel in any way like building a zoo, which I think is a problem. It's an abstract game with animals on the tiles. Yeah. Also weirdly kind of out of print a lot of the time. Let's move straight on. Keltis.
Lost Cities, right?
Yeah.
For me, it was a pointless expansion of Lost Cities, which I think is an absolute brilliant head-to-head two-player game. And the world is full of four-player games. So I wasn't sure, I didn't really see the benefit of of Celtis. It didn't add anything particularly new to it, and if I had 4 people, there are so many other games that I'd rather go and play, whereas if there are 2 people, Lost Cities is one of my go-to games.
Yeah, it's Rainer Knizitz's only Spiel des Jahres winner. He's been nominated many, many times. He's won the Kids Prize. He's won, I think, the Expert Prize as well. But it is his only winner of the big one. And he pitched it to the publisher, which is Cosmos again, as let's do 4-player Lost Cities. And Cosmos went, no, let's retheme it and give it a different title. He then pitched it to Rio Grande in the States, who had the American rights for Lost Cities. And they went, yeah, 4-player Lost Cities, let's do that. Let's call it Lost Cities, the board game. Go and buy Lost Cities, the board game. It's better. It actually includes, the rules are slightly different and slightly better. I would agree. Celtis is unnecessary. Dominion. It's rare that there's a Spiel des Jahres winner that genuinely introduces a new game mechanic. This is the deck building game. Ellie, you were about to...
Oh, it's one of our favourite games at home. We pull it out all the time. It's got huge replayability. There's 25 different cards in each box, and you pick out 10 to play with that turn. And you're just building a deck and trying to get victory points. You can buy cards, victory point cards with your money, but you have to get the money, and you need actions to get the money. And it's great. It's brilliant. There's loads of different expansions. You can choose different boxes. It's great.
It defines deck building games, and I think that's really sad because, again, the games that came after learnt from its mistakes. They've refined deck building, they've taken out what you've got, actions, buying, amount of money, and something else that you can do and need to keep track of in one turn. It's overly complex. It means that if you're playing at 4 players, there's a lot of downtime because you can have throne rooms which double the effect of everything, and you build these huge chains while everyone else is sitting around doing nothing. It exists in an abstract. It's an entirely abstract world, whereas things like Clank and Torrents of the Underdark and the Harry Potter game have taken that, stripped out some of the complicated bits. You don't need Star Realms as well in its own way, and made better games. Dominion's an okay game, but it's been improved on dramatically by more recent games, which isn't true for a lot of other games on this list.
I still think it's a good
For
game.
me, it's pleasing because it was the first deck builder, really. And for me, I have a certain loyalty to things which changed my perception. And Dominion changed my perception of what you could do with cards. And I agree entirely that, as with all of these games that changed our paradigm, the ones that came afterwards, first worst, second best. And so I completely agree with Nick that there are many better games, but I am still hugely fond of it, and it gives me great pleasure. And it's a game to play with people who know it or who are.
Yeah, because then you're much quicker on your turns.
Yeah, and there isn't much downtime if everybody knows the game well.
Okay, we're going to have to shoot ahead. Let's move straight to the popular vote. Who knows Torres? Has played it, has experienced it in to some degree. How about Carcassonne? Yeah, that was fairly obvious. That was going to happen. Villa Paletti. Oh, good Lord, 1 or 2. Versus Alhambra. Yep, Alhambra. Ticket to Ride. 1 or 2 of you. Niagara. Falls off a cliff. Thurn und Taxis. Quite a few, I'm glad to see that. Zularetto. Oh, that's close. Can I see Thurn und Taxis again? It's just Zularetto, I think. Are we agreed? Yeah. Celtis.
Or Lost Cities.
All Lost Cities 4-player, or versus Dominion. Yep, straight through. Okay. So Carcassonne versus Alhambra, both tile layers in which you're building something. Who thinks Carcassonne should go through? Who thinks Alhambra?
Changer again.
Yeah, that's Carcassonne. Ticket to Ride versus Zularetto.
It's part of the fun.
Ticket to Ride, Zularetto.
Oh, Zularetto.
I have to say I'm not a fan of Ticket to Ride, but I am less of a fan of Zularetto. Dominion gets grandfathered in by the benefit of being last on the list. Panel, our choice is Carcassonne versus Ticket to Ride versus Dominion. What goes through?
Well, I'd put Dominion through.
Right.
You put Dominion. Okay,
I would,
one
I
vote.
would.
One vote for Dominion.
Right for me.
Ticket to Ride?
Dominion of those.
Dominion for me.
I
What do
agree.
you
I
think?
don't play it now. I don't like it,
Carcassonne?
but it created.
I would say Carcassonne.
Right. So there's 2 Carcassonnes and 2 Dominions.
Okay, so using the grandfather, who was
Well,
there was a Ticket to Ride.
I was Ticket to
Okay, the Ticket to Ride is eliminated. What's your second place vote?
you have to go for one of the others now.
Carcassonne or Dominion. I'm going to do it by what I enjoy most, which would be Carcassonne.
Okay, Carcassonne goes through. I am surprised. I have
friends
thought Ticket
friends
to
here. who
Ride
never
was
get
gonna
the
win.
games that we get.
Very quickly, very one-sentence summations of the games, because this is the 2010s. We know these ones. Dixit.
Storytelling, lovely abstract cards. Somebody says a word or a sentence, and you each have to choose a card that might fit that, and then everybody votes on which they think was the original card. It's great.
It's the dictionary game. It's the dictionary game with abstract cards.
Yeah.
As I make the point in, I think, the most recent Tabletop Gaming magazine.
You do.
On sale now. Difficult to pitch in the middle. Kind of difficult for first-time players to judge exactly how to describe the cards. That is my problem. It's sold as a gateway game, and it's not a gateway game. I would argue fiercely. Anyone else?
I think it's absolutely a game to play with a group of people who know each other. It's not a good game, not a good walk-up game where you don't know other people's worldviews. It's just too random, too chaotic to try and work out what people might mean.
Okay, quickly on. Quirkle. It's quirky Scrabble. Scrabble with abstract tiles.
Yes.
You know this one, Dave?
Which one?
It's another of the spiels
Oh.
that gets
Yes,
played
that's one
by
of my favourites.
non-gamers in the UK a lot.
David, have you... Quirkle, any
Quirkle
opinion?
is certainly one of my favourites. I was surprised that it made Game of the Year because it is so abstract. But I like abstract games.
But
Yeah.
it is very elegant, and the rules are it's really easy to see how it works. So rule explanation, very quick. People can get straight in, and then they can start to learn the strategies that underlie it and the challenges within it.
Very visually attractive too.
Yeah.
Yes, lovely wooden pieces as well. It's got that Rummy Cub thing of nice bits that click nicely together on the table. Also, the only Spiel des Jahres winner by a solo female game designer. The only one. Susan McKinley-Ross. Kingdom Builder, Donald X. Vaccarino, who did Dominion, does a map-based area control sort of thing. Anyone strong opinions?
Modular board, different setup each time. That's the sort of the best bit about it, really, is it's got quite a lot of replayability because of that. And you put out loads of settlements and get points for putting your settlements in different places according to the win conditions for that game.
Big whoop.
Queen, the manufacturer, are notable for the very high physical quality of their games, not necessarily the quality of their game design, but the physical quality is always robust and clear, and their games are visually very appealing.
It's a kingdom building game where you don't get to kill anybody.
Oh, yes.
This is bad.
Okay, right. Moving straight on, Hanabi, Antoine Bowser's, I think, first and only win. It's the first co-op, I think the only co-op, of cooperatively organising a firework display. I actually use this to teach a lot. It is a brilliant, brilliant game of constrained information. You hold your hand of cards backwards. That's the major idea in it. So other people have to pay points to tell you what's in your own hand. It is a game that will convince you you are a very slow home computer from the 1980s with not very much memory.
Yeah, it's like the slowest ever firework display.
Yes, and often the worst.
Yeah. And it's not the only co-op, because Just One's a co-op.
Yes, yes. Okay, Camel Up. Everyone know Camel Up?
Yeah.
It's whooping. Okay, most people know Camel Up. Let's move straight on. Colt Express. Strong opinions on Colt Express, or can we just kind of assume that people know Camel Up and Colt Express? And Codenames, does everyone know Codenames? Does anyone want us to explain Codenames? Or strong opinions? King Domino. Likewise, we all know King Domino, pretty much. You don't know Camel Up and Colt Express?
Camel Up looks like a race game, but it's actually a betting game. Colt Express looks like a burglary game, but is actually a programming game.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
They both look good. Colt Express has got a lovely train.
They both look lovely.
Yeah,
There's a
nice.
step up. There's a step up in 2014. Suddenly, everything looks amazing compared to the previous, with respect, 30 years.
Yes. Codenames, King Domino. Azul. Anyone need an explanation of Azul? I think he's just going back again. And then Just One. This year's winner, probably not penetrated quite as far as the other ones. Probably the simplest Spiel des Jahres winner, I would say. Just One. Yeah. Very, very simple game. It's essentially the bastard child of Articulate and Boggle. It's got the duplicates cancel rule from Boggle. Anyone else? Any points from the panel on any of those? Any reasons that we should love or hate any of them?
They're all great. I mean, Just One is one of these games where explain the rules and you don't need to buy the game. You just need 7 bits of paper and a pen.
Yeah. Azul's beautiful.
Yes.
It's
Stunning.
got those lovely tiles. It's like Rummy Cub, you know, when you place them, it's great to delve your hand into the bag and feel all the tiles, and they're lovely on the board.
It has real stop and watch factor.
And it's got a great tile drafting mechanism as well, which is different from.
Yeah.
And again, can be, because it's so beautiful, can be introduced to people who would be scared of a lot of these early ones.
Yeah.
And because it's on your own board, again, it stops people being too frightened by it, because you're doing your own thing. There's limited interaction.
Okay, we're going to have to rush through some voting. We're technically over time, but we can get to a conclusion. Dixit versus Quirkle. Who's aware, has played of, owns a copy of, likes, dislikes, but just knows Dixit generally? Yeah. Quirkle, who knows, and good penetration, but not as good as Dixit. Kingdom Builder. Few people like it. Versus Hanabi. That's more. Hanabi goes through. Camel Up. Quite good. Versus Colt Express. That's pretty close. Someone who's got a more straight-on view. Can we see Camel Up again? Colt Express. Camel Up.
Camel Up.
Colt Express. Camel Up. Okay.
Put them both through.
Put them both through. Both through. Okay. Codenames versus King Domino. Codenames. Who knows Codenames? Yeah, everyone. King Domino? Not as much. Not surprising. Codenames sold 1 million copies in its first year. Azul. And Just One.
Also.
That's Azul.
Oh, Just One.
Right. So I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to put Hanabi versus Camel Up. Who thinks Hanabi should go through? Who thinks Camel Up should go through? That's Camel Up. Colt Express versus Codenames. Who thinks Colt Express goes through? Who thinks Codenames goes through? Yeah. And that's Azul versus Dixit then. Who thinks Dixit's got it? Who thinks Azul's got it? You're gamers. Right, so panel, our choice of 3 is Camel Up versus Codenames versus Azul.
Azul.
Camel Up.
Azul.
Codenames.
Azul.
Yep.
Azul, yeah?
Codenames.
2 for Codenames, 2 for Azul.
I'm going to go Codenames because it's one of the very few Spiel des Jahres you can play with a lot of people. Yeah. And that's a real deficiency in an awful lot of Spiel des Jahres winners. They are for 2 to 4 players. And yes, it's family games, but when you want to introduce a bunch of relatives and friends to a game, you need a game that can accommodate 10, 12. I've played it with 16 people before now, and it's great. So that's Codenames through. Yep. I believe Codenames goes through. Right. We are almost done. The final one. 1980s. It was Railway Rivals. I can't remember what won for the 1990s. Someone remind me.
It was
Settlers, wasn't it?
Was it Settlers?
Yeah, Catan.
Catan, sorry. Joe May.
Catan. And someone remind me for the 2000s.
Is it Carcassonne, I think?
Carcassonne.
Yeah.
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 And then
Okay.
Codenames, yeah.
Right, that's a heck of a list. Those are, I would say, exceptional games. All of them. And the 1980s was really tight. Railway Rivals and Hare and Tortoise. Okay, panel, very quickly.
We can't see the list.
Okay, Railway Rivals, Catan, Carcassonne, Codenames. What would be your, very, very succinctly, each of you in turn, which would be your winner and why?
Railway Rivals, because it's our family classic game and you can keep playing it and I love it.
Okay, David.
Carcassonne. I know it best, and as I said before, I still greatly enjoy playing it.
Okay, Theo.
Catan, because it changed the world.
Catan, because it changed my life and brought me back in.
Yeah, I would say Catan simply because I chose Railway Rivals because of the gut. I think Catan is the most satisfying of those games. There is a warmth to playing Catan. It keeps your brain occupied at exactly the right level that you can talk to your friends, but you can plot at the same time. It is perfectly pitched. We don't talk about the pitch of games very much, but so that's our opinion. But this is over to you. Votes for Railway Rivals. You can vote for multiple titles if you want. Why not? Who thinks Railway Rivals has got it? Who would vote for Railway Rivals? Okay, it's some of us. Who thinks Catan should get it? Who thinks Carcassonne should get it? Oh, that's close. And who thinks Codenames should get it? I think that's Codenames out, I think?
Yeah, Codenames.
Okay, Codenames is out and Railway Rivals, I'm afraid, is out. Catan, let's see Catan versus Carcassonne again.
So
What are
Catan.
you voting on?
Sorry?
they're voting on Catan.
You said Catan versus Carcassonne and asked
Yeah.
them to vote. They don't
Yeah.
know.
Catan.
Catan.
Catan. So say that.
So, yes, I'm asking again.
It's getting late.
Okay. Sorry, did we see Catan and Carcassonne? I think Catan's just got it.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Spiel, the greatest game of the Spiel des Jahres is, according to Tabletop Gaming Live 2019, Catan. Thank you very much for your participation. I hope that was fun. I hope you've been introduced to some games that you feel you should try. Do hunt down Railway Rivals. Do find a copy of Hare and Tortoise and play that. El Grande as well, if you haven't. Well, they're all worth a try. They're all interesting, but not all of them are good.
Hare and Tortoise and Just One, as well as quite a few others, are in the games library today.
Okay, it only remains for me to thank you all and my panel, Ellie Dix, the great David Parlett, the great Theo Clarke, and Nick Smith.
We're not great. We didn't get to be great.
No, you're not great.
It's about white hair. Thank you all.
Maybe at some point.